Okay. The stream is going. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watching 100 Movies. I'm Christiana Ellis,
And I'm Mike Mateen.
and tonight we're talking about Metropolis, the 1927 silent sci fi classic, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the 1966 spaghetti western. And we picked a pair of good ones this week, or, this episode, in, in my opinion. I really enjoyed both of these. Um,
They're both good. I enjoyed one way more than the other.
okay. I'm guessing that's The Good and the Bad, and the Ugly.
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. It is sort of one. Um, I wasn't really sure what to expect from Metropolis because I knew that it was kind of influential and all of that. I found myself liking it even quite a bit more than I expected, but certainly it is, you know, it's earlier in cinema history. It's in another language, and I guess it's silent
Silent.
and translated. So it's yeah, I mean, so it was created in another language, and so the title cards had to be translated. But yeah, in any case, so then perhaps if we're going to be talking more maybe about the good, the bad, and the ugly, do you want to start with Metropolis?
That's fine. Yeah.
Okay. One just interesting thing that I realized after we picked these two movies is that both of them have kind of a history of various alternate cuts being put out with different runtimes. And like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly had one version where it was cut all the way down to 95 minutes for syndication on cable. And the truth is, I'm not convinced that I hadn't previously seen one of the shorter cuts because I genuinely did not remember this movie being a 3 hour epic. That was not my recollection of the movie at all.
Yeah. And we could talk more about that one specifically when we get to it. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the concept of I mean, obviously Metropolis wasn't cut for TV, but it was cut because it was a very long movie in the
Mm.
20s. People weren't used to long movies.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting part, like that little factoid of like it only being recently like restored to and it's only to 95%, right? Like there's
Right.
even where there's just black cards,
Yeah.
as it's
Well, it's
moving.
yeah,
Yeah.
and the thing is, like even it's for a movie that was made in 1927. The most recent version only came out in like 2008. And that was because there was a whole bunch of footage that had just been considered completely lost until they found a copy of a bunch of it. And so they had already done like a restoration of everything that had existed up to that point. And they found a copy, and all of that new footage was there was quite a bit of significant footage. But even that had been damaged so much that now when you watch it with that stuff stitched in, it's a notable difference in quality just because the original they were having to pull it from wasn't of sufficient um, quality that they could make it look as nice as the rest.
Yeah, I
Um,
think I saw that it was like 16 millimeter, right?
yeah,
You know,
something like that. And let's see if I can. Let's see. There
and
was
that's even before the damage, right? Like that's just the
right, and then some bits where we know from the original like shooting script and descriptions of it, like we know what's still missing. So yeah, as you mentioned, there's a couple of title cards that where it just kind of has to say like, here's what would have happened in this scene. Um, but it's kind of interesting too, just to reflect on what had been cut out when it was originally released in the U.S. And like some of it is it's really interesting to consider because the explanation given is that they thought that those parts would be confusing. But I feel like without those parts, half the characters' motivations make no sense. Like, in particular, apparently one of the concerns was that the mother of one of our leads and the deceased wife of the head of this city was named Hell, Hel. And I guess they thought like, oh, well, in America, they're going to think that has something to do with Hell, Hell, and they're going to be confused. So let's just cut out every reference to that character.
Right.
And it's like,
I didn't know that.
that is what drives half the plot is.
Yes. Well, I gotta shut this door now. They just ran off.
Mhm.
We're you keep talking.
So, in any case, there have been multiple different versions of this movie, but it is only since um, 2010. Yeah, so here it is. So on July 1st, 2008, film experts in Berlin announced that they had found a 16 millimeter reduction negative of the original cut. And so it was uh, this was a safety reduction made from the original, which was in 35 millimeter. And so that was what we were just discussing. But the idea that this movie made in 1927, we have, after so many decades, managed to recover a lot of it and can now watch it in relatively close condition to the original intended film, after it having been lost for so long. I think that's really kind of amazing. But so,
Yes.
this movie was directed by Fritz Lang, and it was based on a novel. And it was, as mentioned, it's a silent film made in Germany in the sort of expressionist mode. And I was kind of just blown away by a lot of this, like the just science fictional aspects in the story, because I think maybe it doesn't make sense to really think this, but like I found myself realizing I don't think of this kind of sci-fi as having existed in the 20s,
Right.
which is not true, obviously, because here's an example of it, right? But I guess my expectations were very different because I didn't realize, because this is it's a sci-fi world created at the level, certainly the effects are not as sophisticated as today, but from a level of storytelling, the same as today. Like you have these vast underground cities, you have elaborate elevated highways, you have these amazing giant factories, and all of these science fictional concepts like robots that are created to look like real people, and then all of that is tied into the thematic stuff about like exploitation and class and all of that sort of thing. Ultimately, I think the movie is pretty simplistic in its philosophy, right? Like it's you could even say maybe a little naive. Like
I would agree. Yeah.
it's big message ultimately, like to sort of sum it up, to paraphrase, is that uh, all the people up at the top are the brain, and then you have the hands are the people down there doing all the work, and what you need is the heart in between to negotiate between them. And it's not really saying like, no, everyone, we shouldn't have these upper class and lower class stark divisions. It's just kind of saying, no, you need someone in between to negotiate, and like that'll just fix it.
Right.
And that's a little, but that said, I think what is really cool about this movie is just the level of vision in it, just from all of the visuals and the concepts on display, and the way that it's all played out, and just some of like it's just a very coherent, big sci-fi story at a scale that I wouldn't have really thought, like, well, there wasn't really anything like it in 1927.
No, and I agree with all of what you're saying. Like that part of the movie is phenomenal, right? It is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big vision. I knew obviously it was going to have some of that because it's
Mm-hmm.
makes all these lists. Like it's got, it's
I mean, it's unquestionable how influential it must have been over the years, right?
yeah,
Like you can see it in a lot of cases.
you can see it, and it's just it's so I don't even necessarily know that I have criticism of the movie. I think it's just more of a preference of
Oh yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
that's just not what I feel like spending my time doing right now is
Hmm.
reading title cards on a foreign sci-fi movie from the 20s,
Right.
and that's okay. That doesn't take away from the quality of the movie.
Yeah. I mean,
And
I think silent films can be wonderful, but I think there's a reason we don't still make them that way.
right.
Sound. Yeah.
Yes, it's very helpful. It's yeah.
Yeah.
So but yes, I felt like even so going back to the original point of like even going in expecting that it was going to be grand in vision and kind of effects for the time being and all of that, I still was very impressed with, like you said, outside of how simplistic the message was, but same thing, like, you were talking about how we didn't think that like sci-fi films of this, you know, scope were being made back then, you know, just the making a movie that was so definitive about political classes, like I just don't feel like that was something that was done a lot back then. And
Not in America for sure.
no, and even to the point, like obviously we're smart enough to kind of go back and see it, but like
Hmm.
we're so exposed to like the height of communism being like the 50s and 60s, right?
Hmm.
That we forget that this movie was made 5, 10 years
Well,
after the original
right.
revolution. Like, so communism is a fairly new,
Yeah. Well,
the
see,
worker class, right? Is yeah,
here's something I was actually thinking and reading a little bit about afterwards is that one of the hazards of having your story approach these issues but ultimately have a relatively simplistic resolution to them is it kind of allows a wide variety of people to claim it,
yeah.
right? And so, for example, being
Maybe that's
made
by
in
design.
1927 in Germany, there's some people in the mix at that time who are kind of said, huh, yeah, revolution, huh? Yeah, you know, the corrupt bureaucrats up front are keeping us down. Maybe we need a change in regime. Like some of that did happen, and it's just an illustration sometimes of when you want to use metaphor in your sci-fi. Sometimes having it too separated from really direct, specific world context can allow anyone who wants to try to say, yes, this is telling my story. I'm one of the good. I'm like the good guys in this story, even when what they want to do is horrible.
Which the funny like thing, I just didn't even like really connect it until now. Like talking about how the end message is the mediator between the head and the hands is the
Hmm.
heart. Like that is almost how Hitler positioned himself, was
Yeah.
that he was the heart, right? Like there was
Well, right. Yeah. I mean, because that's the
he didn't
the.
he wasn't a work like he wasn't a communist, obviously he was a
Mhm.
fascist, right? Like
Yeah.
he wanted the
Well,
power and
there
he
it's
wanted the
the whole national socialism where it's kind of trying to adopt language from other philosophies, but still ultimately make it all about fascism.
right. So it's like he's taking the language from the elite
Hmm.
and the language from the working class
Yeah.
and saying, I'm the one that can unite everybody,
Right.
right? Like I'm the one that drives Germany forward
Hmm.
because I can do both, right? Like he's taking that piece of this movie, right?
Right.
Whereas the
Uh,
Stalins and those guys are like, no, the working class, but then they obviously, betrayed them and became,
yeah.
but
So
conceptually they were, the workers unite,
right.
right?
But it's just an illustration too of sometimes when you are approaching a touchy philosophical or political subject like that, and you try to keep a light touch or avoid too many specifics that make it too definitive, it it leaves it open to get co-opted more easily. It just
Yeah, I mean,
reminds
I've
me.
I've definitely seen criticisms of this film that say it's a pro-communism film, right?
Yeah.
Which it's not really.
Well,
Be-
yeah,
and
it's
it
kind of like, well, could it be?
you
Yeah,
you
you
but
could
you could
certainly
rip
see people
that.
read it that way, and
Yeah.
it's certainly it's anti class exploitation,
Hmm.
right? And so that's ultimately the thing, is that it kind of thematically ends up being a little bit trite in a way that doesn't really say as much as it maybe wanted to, because it kind of can be interpreted in so many different ways by virtue of it not saying something really specific. Certainly, you could say it's bad to exploit the workers, but it also isn't saying, it's basically just saying the people at the top shouldn't be so mean. That's ultimately its message. Um,
Yeah. But to go back to like to kind of give it a little bit of grace to the original point is that
mm,
this thing was going beyond a scope of what most media was doing at the time. So it's like
mm,
it's not necessarily in hindsight we can say it's a little bit of a miss, but like at the time, like no one was doing anything this bold,
yeah.
right?
Well, sure. Like, this is on a scale
Mhm.
different than I think there probably were people doing smaller stuff, but yeah, this was um, political and in a way that was a lot less common for sure. Um, but I'm looking up at the like the Wikipedia here, where it's talking about the reception, and it's saying, despite the later reputation, some contemporary critics panned it, saying, kind of what we were saying, that the scenario considered the scenario to be weak, and that the artistic work had been wasted on the manufactured story. A review by H.G. Wells accused it of foolishness, cliche, platitude, and muddlement about mechanical progress and progress in general. Um, but one of the weird points there, just from H.G. Wells, is that he believed that automation was going to relieve human drudgery. Basically, like, oh, well, if we can do things faster within automation, then everyone will have more leisure time. And so part of his complaint about the film was it was suggesting that wouldn't be true. And, well, we know how that's turned out.
Which that is interesting coming from him. Like I don't want to get into the whole tangent on his stuff, but
mm.
that's doesn't he critique that in the Time Machine? Time Machine's H.G. Wells, right?
um, Time Machine is now. See, now I'm confused too. Yes, Time Machine is his. Island of Doctor Moreau, Invisible Man, War of the Worlds.
So the Time Machine is the one that I'm thinking where he critiques that society will become too leisurely.
Well, I think I don't know that it's too leisurely, because it's the same thing, right? You've got the Eloi and the Morlocks, right? It's a similar scenario in that you've got the ones who don't have to do anything and they become weak, and then you have the ones that have to do everything and they become, like, cruel, and
Yes.
oppressed, right?
Okay. So that now okay, you're right. Now I'm putting that back like together. That okay. So it does this criticism does make sense because like he took the same critique of that society and he
Mm-hmm.
said
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
force the workers into being the automation, like they will
Mm.
become ugly and nasty. Like it's not like a good thing, right?
Well,
But the
and
workers are good people and the elites are good people. It's like neither are great, right?
well,
But
and
they
also the suggestion that having them separate for too long makes it so that they can no longer understand each other at all.
right.
So, having someone be in the middle is no longer sufficient by the time you get to the scenario he has. And so,
Yeah.
anyway, so lots
But
of
yes.
classic sci-fi that we're talking about. Let's talk a little bit just what's the basic plot here of this. We have a city where you have the people who are living up above, who are, at play. They're leisurely, they're rich, they're comfortable. And then you have the workers who live below and do all the hard work, and have, very little rights or privileges in that regard. And the inciting incident is that a woman who is looking after a lot of children down in the lower city. It's not entirely clear to me, because it seems like she wouldn't have been allowed to do this, but managed to somehow. She
It
brings,
felt to me like it was almost like a field trip, right?
yeah,
Like,
but it also seems like as soon as she was up there, the security guards rushed over to make her go away, right? So it doesn't seem like it was something that was permitted, and yet she managed to accomplish it. But what she did is she brought a bunch of the kids from the lower city up to the elaborate pleasure gardens of the above world to basically, tell the people up there, these are your brothers and sisters. And you don't even know about them because we are so separated. And we have the our lead. What's his name? Freder is the son of the guy who is sort of in charge of everything. The mayor or whatever of the city, or the head of the corporation, or whatever you want to call it. But he basically sees Maria and, you know, simultaneously, like, how much of this is he is infatuated with her, and how much of it is he is genuinely moved by what she says? Seems like it's maybe a combination
yep.
of those two things. But in any case, because he is so fascinated by her and what she said, he tries to follow her and ends up seeing a lot of the workings that make his lifestyle possible, these big machines and everything below, and how hard everyone is having to work down there to do it. And in fact, he sees basically an industrial accident caused by working these workers so hard that one of them passes out and isn't able to do his thing, and so there's a big explosion and a bunch of people are hurt. And there's an actual real interesting expressionist element there where he hallucinates that this big machine is actually like a pagan god where people are being sacrificed to it.
Right.
And so from there, he basically tries to go tell his dad, how bad it is and that we got to fix it, and finds that his dad is basically just not, at all interested. And so he leaves and goes back, and he's trying to follow Maria. He's still kind of in love with her. But in the meantime, we discover the dad has been working with a mad scientist who was apparently also in love with the dad's wife. And there's a whole complicated thing where this mad scientist has created a robot human that he believes will be like a replacement for the lost Hel, as we mentioned. But what the dad asks him to do is, this Maria character is saying dangerous things down there. And she's going to cause problems. Like, she's already turned my son against me. What we need to do is make the robot look like her. And so then what that replacement, that false Maria, will do is rile up the workers so much that they do enough rebelling that I can justify like a violent reprisal and then put down the revolution to good. It's like, basically, instead of it just being fermenting in pockets where I don't know where they are, I want her to make them come out of hiding so that I can get them. That's the idea. But we can see,
Which
because
was a dangerous plan from the
oh,
beginning.
for sure. And the thing is, we can also see, I think the movie does a really good job of showing us that they're kind of all in this for the wrong reasons. Like, both of the mad scientist and the father are deluding themselves about their own actions. Right? Because for one, the mad scientist is going along with this plan, but he basically says, yes, he's secretly saying, I think your plan is stupid and terrible and it's going to blow up in your face. And that's what I want to happen because I hate you because I loved her. But he's not telling the dad this, of course. And in the meantime, we've got the dad who is basically feeling the relatively unsympathetic position of, I'm sad that my son hates me, but I'm not willing to change anything about it. To do, in fact, I'm going to specifically try to undermine the elements that convinced him to turn against me. So in the meantime, we have all of this, and so the actress who plays both Maria and then the false Maria is amazing, because the robot, I think if people have seen, like, looking at the, if you're watching the video, we have the poster, you can see a bit of the robot, and the robot's one of the most iconic images from the movie. Like, it's usually the image of that robot is what's shown, like, when you see any still from this movie. But
I've actually seen, and maybe it was on Amazon when I rented it, like a modernized version of the robot where they've taken and I mean it looks like it looks, but it's done as if it was made with current day effects.
interesting.
I think it might have been somewhere on Amazon.
I
I
don't
saw
know.
that. Yeah, it was in
But
like
like,
in color and like blues and greens and stuff. It was really cool. Yeah.
huh, interesting. But in any case, the like, just looking at the robot, like, one thing that you can immediately see is, looks a lot like C-3PO, right?
Yeah.
It seems inconceivable to question that George Lucas must have been influenced by Metropolis when he was approving designs for C-3PO, because I don't think he, like, personally drew up that concept art, but the point is, C-3PO looks like the robot from Metropolis. But in any case, once she is, transformed, she looks just like this other Maria and is able to act like her to the extent that people are fooled. But immediately starts telling everybody that, like, what Maria had been saying is, we have to wait for the mediator to show up to come help us. There's some religious allegory in there too, right? We have to wait for, the Savior to come. But there's also an element there of, like, the movie essentially validates that position because Freder eventually is able to take that role and save the day by being this mediator, right? But what the false Maria comes in to do while the real Maria has been kidnapped is to tell everyone, screw waiting. We're going to take what we want. We're going to violently overthrow it. They use the machines to power their luxury, so we need to destroy the machines. Except that what we know through broader context, and because a couple of the other characters tell us, is like, those machines also keep your entire underground city from being flooded. If you destroy those machines, it will flood your whole city and kill anybody who's down there. But the revolution is, this violent overthrow is happening anyway, and it's unfortunately so destructive that the father's attempts to use this as justification is moot, because it basically means that, the entire workers' city gets flooded. And there's a whole bit where everyone has gotten so riled up that they leave their kids behind to go do this violence, but that means the kids are left behind where the city is going to be flooded. And it seems, for a while, like, is this movie really going to drown dozens of children? It seems like it seems like it's gonna for a little while. But Maria is down there, and eventually Freder and what's his name? This other guy, this worker that Freder has befriended. No. It's the boss's flunky that gets fired for being insufficiently toady. Is who helps Freder, right? Like, so they go down. They manage to rescue the kids. But then there's a whole interesting sequence where the false Maria is off having a party with all of the upper level people now, because she's basically celebrating that she's accomplished what she was trying to do. But the workers have just realized, oh no, our city's been flooded. They think all of their children have been drowned, and they think Maria is who did it. So they're going to try to go kill Maria, while in the meantime, we know the real Maria has escaped, and our fears are they're gonna kill the real Maria for what they think, for what the false Maria did. And there's a whole, terrifying sequence where they get exchanged, but that actress is amazing. Like, her different roles, like what she's doing as the false Maria, is really kind of amazing. There's all sorts of like religious apocalyptic symbolism going on in there. And it's, like this movie is, I think, functional on a like an action level. And I don't mean function like functional sounds like faint praise. What I'm saying is I think it really works on a story level, like just the tension of the action of what's happening in the story and all of that sort of thing. I think really works. Visually, it's incredible. I think the performances are all really good. Ultimately, kind of the themes get resolved in a way that's a little pat, as we kind of talked about. But I found myself really pleasantly surprised by how compelling I felt actually watching it. Like I was interested to watch it because I was knew it was really influential, but I found myself really sucked in and enjoying it as it went.
Yeah, and I think I just still stayed on the surface level of like, man, this thing is really blowing me away from its, I mean, the set design
Mm,
is unbelievable, the special effects, like
yeah.
considering like what they were doing. I mean, the flooding is
Hmm.
I mean, very realistic
Yeah.
for considering like how they must have had to do it back then.
Well, and just how much they are able to make really elaborate matte paintings seem to mesh with the real sets,
Yep.
creating these incredible locations. Some of the effects they use when like the creation of the robot and like when they're making the robot change to look like Maria, for example.
Yep.
Um, I guarantee if you have not seen this movie, you are probably underestimating how good the effects look for
I would
1927.
agree. Yeah, I would definitely agree. And so I don't want to take away from any of that of it. It's
Mm.
just
Oh, sure. Like again, like it doesn't have to be a comparison. It doesn't have to. It's we're not trying to have one of or the other of these beat the other one, right? It's like, but yeah, um, I think it is a fascinating piece of cinema history. I think it's surprisingly exciting to watch. But it is a silent movie. It's I think it has been surpassed, but it's unquestionably like a foundation of science fiction cinema
yeah.
in a meaningful way. And I found it like even beyond just that aspect of it, I really enjoyed watching it.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that maybe didn't do this movie any favors for me is I kind of like even though it's summer, like I just there's certain ones of these movies that like I kind of have to watch in like my downtime, like because I have it.
Mm.
There's certain of these movies where it's like I'll invite my wife to watch them with me, and like we kind of make it a thing. But some of them it's just kind of like I have to figure out. Oh, I've got some free time right now. Like I
Mm-hmm.
want to watch this movie when she's not around or doing something else, and so what that led to was sort of like a disengagement from the beginning of like
Mm.
almost like this was an obligation to watch this for what we're doing, not intentional,
Mm-hmm.
but I now thinking back on it I feel like I kind of had that. But I watched The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly first, and I started with the same mindset, but then I just like got sucked into it.
Yeah. Well, I
And I
think.
just don't know that this movie ever did that to me, and it's not the
Mm-hmm.
movie's fault. Like it just so when we do compare them, I think
Yeah.
that actually did affect like again, not that I didn't enjoy it. It was just like
Well, like
we had to
they're
sit and
they're
like
very
wait for it
different
to go through
films,
its
right?
beats.
Like
Yeah.
because I think the good, the bad, and the ugly, it's not really trying to be about anything. It's just being a pulp western in a big way, and it's extremely successful at that, right?
Well,
Um,
but to the extent that it is about anything, it's about human condition and human like sort of the underside of like the human condition of
hmm.
greed and relationships with
Hmm.
people that you
But I
have an
mean,
affinity
like
but
these
don't trust like
characters are
yeah.
like I love them. Like I do, don't get me wrong. This is not a criticism of the movie, but all the characters are like archetypes, right? Like they don't play like real people. They play like Western heroes and villains to incredible effect. I think that's great about the movie, but it's doing something different, right? Um, and I'm not
Yeah,
trying to
well, I'll
even
get
say
more
one
into
is
that
better
as we
than.
get to that. I was
Okay.
sort of transitioning into it, but I'll get more
Okay.
into that.
Sure.
I actually feel much more strongly that it's
Okay.
it's more that there's more
Well,
depth to it than
yeah,
that. But
I think it's certainly saying some things about like war, for example.
no, I'm just talking about the archetypes and like,
Okay, well, we'll
yeah,
get back to that, but I guess what I was
yeah.
just trying to say
So
is, I think the good, the bad, and the ugly, broadly speaking, is primarily focused on just being an entertaining adventure, as opposed to like a thesis statement or something like that. And Metropolis is like envisioning. So again, I'm really not trying to say one is better than the other in this regard. These are both great things that movies can do. They're just, I'm only trying to illustrate that they are doing such different things. I think it makes them difficult to compare directly.
and I wasn't trying to compare them. I was just talking about my
Hmm.
experience watching them and kind of my mindset and how that related to one another,
Sure.
you know.
But I think there's a difference, though, between writing an adventure with compelling characters and writing a parable morality play, um, which is more like what Metropolis is doing, right? Like the characters in Metropolis are barely characters because they're functional pieces in the broad story that it's trying to tell parable wise, right? It's it's evoking the Tower of Babel on purpose, right? It's trying to feel like more like a fairy tale, right? Whereas Good, Bad, and the Ugly is more like pulp adventure. Um, and it's not that I'm not saying the characters are more three dimensional in Metropolis. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. But what I'm saying is that in Metropolis, the characters are explicitly designed to be uh, a a role in the plot, like an ideal that is represented by that character in the morality play that the story is telling. Whereas,
I
yeah,
I'm,
whereas I
I'm
think Good, the Bad, and the
really not
Ugly
trying to
is
compare
just
them.
like,
I'm just
yeah, okay.
comparing my watching experience,
All
not the
right.
actual films.
Well, okay. Well, so but like, I guess, I'm not trying to make it about comparing as much as like you seem to have a different description of the movie. And again, I'm interested in hearing that. I just want to make sure that if we're done with Metropolis, we can officially move on.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So Metropolis. But so then we have The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which is, I guess, technically the third movie in what is sometimes called the Dollars trilogy, which is Fistful of Dollars, A Few Dollars More, and then this one.
Correct. Yep.
Um, and I have to confess, if I have watched the other ones at all, I really don't remember them other than I guess Clint Eastwood is in them.
And he looks like he looks in this movie.
Yeah. And so like are the other characters from this one in those as well? Cuz I think they are,
So they're
right?
not, but that's actually
Oh.
one of the fun, like, interesting. There's two interesting parts to
Mhm.
that, at least in my opinion.
Okay.
Number one is the opening of the movie,
Mhm.
right? Where he saves Tuco from being hanged, or that part of the opening of the movie, right?
Yeah.
Where he, with the cool trick shot where he shoots the noose.
Mhm.
This guy Tuco's getting hanged,
Yeah.
and
He
and
brings
he shoots him,
Tuco in
and
to collect the bounty and then rescues him from getting hanged. So they can
right,
split the money is the idea. Right.
right, and then ultimately like leaves him in the desert to maybe die, maybe not. Like, which,
Mm.
and again, until you get the feel of these characters, like some of these early relationships, you're like, what the hell are they doing to each other? Right. And so it makes it feel on purpose like there's an established relationship between them, which there is. They
Mhm.
used to be partners. So having not seen the others, you would make the assumption that, oh, well, maybe that partnership was established in the other ones. It's not. Tuco does not exist in the other two movies. And to the point where he specifically doesn't have a partner. And one of Eastwood's hesitations about the script was how different this one was than the other two because he wasn't on his own. He had to deal with this partner and who
Mhm.
might even upstage him as he was starting to become a star, which in some senses he does, right? Like Tuco is
Tuco is, I think he like it's interesting actually.
He doesn't actually upstage him, but he definitely holds
Yeah,
his own as a
he
yeah.
he is the pivot that the movie revolves around.
Yes.
Um, because it is all, yeah, like both Angel Eyes and played by Lee Van Cleef, and um, Blondie, which I'm doing in finger quotes because I guess officially that's not his name. That's just what Tuco calls him.
Correct. It's always the point of all three movies is that he never reveals his name. He is the man with no name.
Which is it has a fun parallel in the climax of this one. Um,
Yes. And also that's also where the Blondie thing came from, is because in the other movies it didn't matter because there wasn't a ton of reason for
no
someone
one
to
needed to call him anything.
right. But now you've got a guy that's with him all the time and has to speak to him, right? So so they had to create a nickname, right?
Also,
And so that's where
Tuco feels like the sort of person who would get annoyed at not having anything to call him, and
right.
just like say, "Well, I'm just going to give you my own nickname then."
Right. And
Yeah,
I'm gonna call you Blondie in sort of a dismissive,
yeah,
almost a one
yeah.
of those nicknames where it's like kind of putting you down a little bit
Right,
because like,
right.
yeah, you don't
So
really look like anybody
I
else.
guess the
Yeah.
question is, so Lee Van Cleef is in the other ones though, right?
So that's the second interesting part of
Okay.
this. He's only in one of them, but he's a different character.
Oh, so it's the same actor, but so these are a trilogy in the sense that Clint Eastwood is kind of, sort of, mostly playing the same character, but there's
He's
not,
always the same character. Yes.
but
He's always the man
it's
with no
not,
name who's a bounty hunter.
but
Yeah.
it's not really serialized in the sense that, like, is it even like, isn't there some timeline weirdness too? Like, because this one's obviously taking place during the Civil War, right?
I'm not 100% sure of that because I haven't rewatched them and paid attention, but they are the same man getting into different adventures, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
and they are constantly evolving in what they are, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
the first one is very much just like him that's fistful of dollars, is that he goes into some town and there's, a gang terrorizing, or two gangs terrorizing the people, and he sort of floats between both gangs and the people, making money off of everybody, but then ultimately helps the people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like so he becomes good even though he's just doing it for money. And it's sort of left with this sort of like moral ambiguity behind it. And then Fistful of Dollars, there was something more to that one. Oh, I think he's competing with Lee Van Cleef for a bounty, but there's something else in that. That one I haven't seen in a long time. That one, there's some other reason where, again, there's sort of this moral ambiguity to his character, like, which is why, you know, in the series, this is the most evolved of the three movies, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's also kind of ironic that he is the good.
Well, yeah. So let me finish the thought, but I have more to say about that in a moment.
Because he's not good in the traditional sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why, like, I completely understand, and I don't disagree with the idea of like the pulp western, but this movie is made at the time to almost be like an anti-western, right? Like to go against the John Wayne, like the hero rides in and he's
Mm.
only got good things behind him.
I guess, yeah.
It's meant to subvert that a little bit.
I mean,
Where like
John Wayne made some movies like that too, though, right? Like The Searchers is not on his side.
that's much further along though,
Fair
right? Like
enough. Fair
this
enough.
is the early westerns, right? Like where it's the hero is the hero, the bad guy is the bad guy, right? And so that's where the names come in, is like you have the good and the bad, and they're like, oh, when we threw
I
this
mean,
like
The
comic
Searchers
relief, he's
is
like,
from like 10 years before this, though.
really?
Yeah.
Hmm.
I just looked it up, 1956.
That one would stand against it, but if you do think of primarily westerns, there
Mm.
is a
Yeah, it's certainly a
guy on the
departure
white
from,
horse, right? Like
yeah.
let's use that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's the good guy. And then there's the villain, which is, the guy in the black hat and the black mustache, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so they use those terminologies. And then the ugly is meant almost like the fool, right? Like the Joker,
Yeah.
you know. But yet the good guy isn't the guy on the white horse, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
he's just the guy that he's very procedural, he's really talented, he's very good looking. Like he's kind of the guy that we like wanna live with. the ugly is like, well, he's not ugly. Like he's funny. He's talented still.
Hmm.
Like,
He's
and
kind of like the what's ugly about him is that he's just fundamentally a selfish, greedy person,
yes,
and he's always trying to think of some scheme to extract money from
right. And
whoever.
this is where I got into where I think that these characters are a little more complex than just archetypes. Is like they're almost meant to be like I feel like meant to be pieces of us, but like not the best parts, right? It's like he's basically the id, right? Like
Hmm.
the one that just does what you need to do, wants what it wants. And then the other two pieces, which again, these are not aspirational pieces of us
Hmm.
by any means, right? So Clint Eastwood and Angel Eyes, the man with no name and Angel Eyes, are trying to do the same thing. They're trying to accomplish the same goal the entire movie.
Hmm.
They just go about it fundamentally different, and one we just happen to more agree with, even though it's not like pure in motive.
Hmm. Well, so what I wanted to kind of jump back to is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at the beginning of the movie, we meet Angel Eyes, played by Lee Van Cleef, and the movie clearly shows him as the bad.
Yeah,
We meet Tuco, and it clearly says he is the ugly. But I
yes,
don't think Blondie
it
actually
does.
gets the good title card, does he?
He does.
At the
Yeah, he does.
beginning?
Yes, he gets one at the beginning and at the end. They both get they all three of them get title cards at the front and the end. He gets it after he rescues Tuco from the hanging. Like after he
Hmm.
shoots him before he goes to get him, it
I guess I believe you. I maybe just missed it, but I kind of
yeah,
thought
there's a freeze
it
frame with him with the rifle and it just says the good.
fair
Yeah.
enough. So maybe I just kind of was looking away from the screen for a second or something. But I almost kind of wish that it wasn't there because I had kind of just a whole thought about it of like, I kind of liked the idea, and maybe this is just undercut by the fact this is really kind of intended to be a third in a series anyway. But I kind of had the idea that he really wasn't the good until the end.
So what I also
Like
think
he didn't
is
earn his label until the end. That's kind of what I was thinking.
I think that that's a great. I mean, I think that that's still a fair
Hmm. But yeah,
because
the movie
the
just didn't
label.
decide uh to official like it was going ahead to say just like, yeah, no, this is the guy. He's gonna be the good. You'll see.
Well, and that's where I think what you're saying is like is similar to what I'm feeling is that like while the movie does definitively put them in these roles, is they all have aspects of each other, right? Like so
Hmm.
it he doesn't really earn the good until the end, just like Tuco earns the ugly sometimes, and sometimes he's also good and
Hmm.
helpful, right? Like he, there's a whole part of this where like if you were kind of looking at this, in the beginning, after so Tuco gets rescued, he leaves him, he goes back, but then he eventually gets the drop
Hmm.
on the man with no name, tries to make him hang himself, could have shot him. Eventually he escapes, he's fine, catches him again, and then makes him, march through the desert with no water, torturing him. Could have killed him any of the time. Like, and some
Hmm.
of the point is like, this feels like weird dramatic license of like, why doesn't he just fucking kill him,
Yeah.
right?
Well,
He's
I
so
mean,
bad at him.
honestly, like what he seems to really trying to do is it's almost like worse than just killing him though. Like ultimately he gets away. He manages to survive barely. Like he survives by finding people who are willing to take care of him for several weeks while he recovers.
Yes, and yes, it's ultimately like goaded over by the fact that he has the piece of information of how to
Hmm.
find the
Right.
gold, but yet I feel like it's more complex than that. It's like these guys keep doing this to each other. It's like, and it's not like the good didn't
Hmm.
just do the same thing to him, kind of,
Yeah.
maybe not in the same extreme.
Right. Well, certainly, yeah. So
And
like,
then it's framed with him making him hang himself at the end again,
hmm,
just like he did to him or was
yeah.
going to do to him. And it's almost like what it feels like is not just that he wanted to torture him, but that just like the reason why that's in a movie is so that we know the hero still has a chance. It's almost feels like Tuco was like, I'm not ready to kill him. I'm actually okay if somehow this works out, but I
It
just don't know what that is, right?
what it feels like to me is that it, on the one hand, you could read it as an explicitly malicious thing of like, it's not even enough for me to kill you. I need to make you suffer first in an extended, brutal way over the course of several days. Like, or at least one full long day, with no water, walking through the really hot desert, no hat and all of that stuff. So, um, but it does feel like this is where we get into some of the just the fun, like the machismo of this kind of story. It feels like if Blondie just said, "I'm sorry," Tuco would forgive him.
Oh, 100%.
But Blondie would never say it because he's not sorry.
Yes. And that's where I agree, where the
Mm-hmm.
complexities of this are is like, I'm willing to give you all this chance to say that you're sorry. Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
willing to like take this revenge out
I
of you.
want you to like ask me not to do this. I want you to apologize for doing, like, you hurt my feelings by abandoning me. And so I want you to say you're sorry and ask me to stop torturing you, and I will. But the man with no name is this sort of asshole who just is like, no, I'm going to let you kill me instead of saying I'm sorry.
Right. And this is what I'm saying is like all three of these guys have like these there's a little more complexity to like
Mm-hmm.
how they are. Like he's not necessarily that good. Like he is kind of an asshole,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I
And
was never saying they
Tuco,
were not complex.
yeah,
That was
yeah,
never
no,
what I
no,
was
yeah,
trying
but
to
not but
say.
when I guess when I heard archetypes, which you're right, they are archetypes. I was thinking that you were thinking they were too
I
narrow, and
see,
that
like, archetypes is almost like not even what I mean. My point is, like, I think where I would disagree is disagree with, what I was trying to say is this movie is not trying to tell us something. It's not trying to make a statement. It's trying to say, here's some fun characters that are fun. It's entertaining to watch them do
yeah.
their thing.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot more sense. And so
Archetypes was maybe the wrong word there because that was
yeah,
really
and I
almost
maybe
more
had
what I
more
was.
of a stronger like
Yeah.
reaction to it of like thinking
Mm-hmm.
like, oh no, this is this guy and this is this guy and this
Yeah.
is this guy,
Because
which is how the movie
what I was
lays
trying
it out
to,
for us.
yeah,
Right.
what I was
Yeah.
trying to draw a contrast behind, and I think I maybe just didn't explain it well. Archetypes was the wrong word in that context. What I was trying to say is like it's more like what I got to with Metropolis is trying to tell like a fairy tale with a moral in it. It's a parable. It's a fable where
Right.
each character specifically represents something and has to do what they do, not because that's what that character would do, but because that's what the parable requires.
Yeah. Totally
The
makes sense now.
Good,
Now,
the Bad,
yeah,
and the
now you
Ugly
explain
is
it.
not like that at all. It's just telling an adventure story.
Yes. But a very but I guess that's where maybe I also
Mm-hmm.
is like I feel like like I get defensive because I feel like it's more than it not that it isn't an adventure story, but like
Mm-hmm.
it is saying and I'm not saying this is what you're saying, but again, sort of my reaction
Mm-hmm.
and why I'm trying to like explain my reaction was like but it's like it's just showing us all these things and just like letting us experience them,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like showing us what these people are like and like letting us see where sometimes those pieces of ourselves are there and how they're not actually they kind of blend between different things and like the good guy's not really necessarily the good guy,
Mm-hmm.
he's just you know anyway, the one that we have the most affinity towards, but yeah, I think it so going back to so the whole beginning of the movie is
Mm-hmm.
very it's sort of odd because it feels like maybe you needed something from the other trilogies. You're trying to understand why these two guys are doing this to each other. And I think, like you said, you sort of get to the point of like, oh, Tuco just wants him to, like he just wants to be apologized to, which is the reason he didn't shoot him. Who was going to make him hang himself because he thought probably the same thing. If he's hanging and dying, he's going to apologize.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, my throat just got itchy.
Yeah,
Got excited.
happens.
But then both times that he gets away, it's almost like Tuco's not really that disappointed, right? Like he
Mm-hmm.
doesn't want, it feels like he doesn't really want him to die.
Mm-hmm.
He just, like you said, he got his feelings hurt. He didn't understand why he turned him in, saved him, and then made him walk back through the desert himself
Mm-hmm.
and almost die. So like that whole relationship like continues to evolve in like such a fun way, right? Like the way that
Mm-hmm.
they keep sort of trusting each other, sort of helping each other, sometimes betraying each other, sometimes not trusting each other, getting together when it's useful for each other, but
Mm-hmm.
also getting together because they are actually partners. They just don't want to admit it.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole part of the movie where they're like, I have one piece of information to find the gold, you have the other.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be partners. But like they're actually being partners, even if
Yeah.
they both, yeah. To the
Yeah.
point where Tuco is finally like, "Hey, how about we just like get rid of this, and I tell you my half, you tell me your half."
Mm-hmm.
And then he goes first, offering it up. Seems really genuine.
Yeah.
Of course, the man with no name,
What we learn is that he
he gives them the wrong, yeah, he gives
appears
them the wrong
to
piece of
give it, but
information.
well, and it's funny
And then
because
Tuco still betrays him.
yeah, well, and it's interesting too, just because I because we can imagine that for Tuco, he's kind of the scorpion in the Scorpion and the Frog story, right?
Right.
Like he's going to betray people because he can't even really help it. Like he'll betray people when it's not even really in his interest to do so.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a great analogy. I love
yeah.
that. Yeah.
And so like he is offering this probably partly because it's like he's thinking this is turning out to be really hard to get there. And so maybe if I actually get him to stick with me, we'll both get to share it at least instead of, maybe I know everything, but I'm not able to get it. Right. And so it's better, it's a higher chance of success as a pair. And maybe it's, and but it's also like, it's like, maybe we're buddies now. Wouldn't that be great? That'd be nice. I'd like that. But
Yeah.
I'll still try. I gotta try to get all the money myself. Um, but and it's at the same time, and of course, Blondie, the man with no name is, just on the constant. It's like, okay, when's his next thing? It's gonna be something. It's coming.
Right. And the way he constantly prepares for that, like the
Mm-hmm.
methodical piece and how it plays out,
Mm-hmm.
like by giving him the wrong, and of course, like
Well,
the
so
way it's revealed of like, because at first you're like, well, especially like when he's running through the grave, he's like, oh, he's not gonna like if you gave him the wrong name, he'll never find it. And then he finds it, and you're like, oh, I guess he did. But then the like kicker is the guy told him it's the unmarked grave next to this guy.
right, so
Like
let
he
him
had a
find the one. Like he'll find that one, so I'll know where it is next to that. But he will dig and it won't be there. So he'll
yes.
waste a bunch of time. And so if he gets there ahead of me, he'll waste his time digging up that one, and then I just have to catch up and know that it's the one next to
And
it.
go to the one next
Well,
door.
and
Right.
then there's a
Yeah.
lot of fun with this whole idea that because there is no actual name, like it's a little bit of a sort of like pedantic sort of thing of like, well, I can't give you the name because I don't know the name. There is no name. Like, and of course, obviously, he could act. He knows what they mean. He knows that he could just say, yes, it's the unknown unmarked grave next to this one. But he kind of like likes to try to pretend that it's this whole tie into like he has no name, right? But and then
Well,
playing
and then
off
the
with the whole
final
thing of like
kicker,
I'm writing it on the rock.
that's the final
Yeah.
kicker, right? Like to everything you just described is like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna write the name on the rock, and whoever survives the standoff,
Well,
you can
but like
figure it
the
out.
hilarious piece of that, of course, is that if he were to die, they wouldn't have it.
Right.
right? Yeah. So,
Because there is no name on the grave, and
but
it's not like the rock says
yeah.
it's the one next to him. It just
Mhm.
has nothing on it. Yeah.
Well, and so we really haven't talked about Lee Van Cleef, Angel Eyes, in this at all. But it's partly just because he is the villain, right? He's explicitly the bad, but he is also like, you know, Clint Eastwood is the hero, right? He is the one that we actually like. The happy ending of this movie is he gets the money, right? Like that's what we feel pretty much throughout. But Tuco, kind of like him. He's kind of a scamp. Like we kind of want to see him get by all right. We certainly don't want him to die, right? So it's kind of complicated, but Angel Eyes, straight up bad guy. He just kills people. He doesn't care. He's malicious. He tortures people. Does all sorts of bad stuff, and is just very like. There's no like. Not that Blondie or Tuco is especially honorable, but they're at the very least not malicious. They're not malevolent. They're
Right.
just self-interested. Whereas Angel Eyes is kind of like he's greedy, but also literally the more people he has to kill on his way, the better for him.
Right. And I think that's again one of the interesting things of this movie is that
Mm-hmm.
all three of these guys who are very different and represent very different archetypes or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
they all have the same goal. It's not like the
Yeah.
villain, it's not like Lee Van Cleef has Angel Eyes has a different goal that they're trying to foil.
Mm-hmm.
They all want the same thing. He just goes about it through this like really awful way. Whereas, like you said, Tuco goes
Mm-hmm.
through them that's just like, I'm just gonna whatever situation presents itself at hand, I'm gonna take advantage of it to try to
Mm-hmm.
get to this goal.
Yeah, so not only
And
am
then
I trying to get the money, but I am going to proactively kill anybody else who even knows anything about it.
right. And then you have the man with no name who also just wants to get the money,
Mm-hmm.
but is much more methodical and strategic about it. To
Mm-hmm.
like you said,
More of a
he's thinking
code
about how
about.
he reveals the information.
Mm-hmm.
He's thinking about what's Tuco going to do next, and so I'll give him part of the information, but not all of it. In case there is a gunfight or he tries to kill me when he's
Mm-hmm.
asleep, I'm going to unload his bullets. Like
Yeah,
he's always one step ahead of everybody,
right. But
right?
even
But
throughout,
they're all
like,
doing the same thing.
yeah,
Yeah.
because like we just talked about him, how good is he really? Because like like his whole scam at the beginning, which he apparently after parting ways with Tuco just finds someone else to do it with. Because it's kind of like if you're good at something, never do it for free. What he's good at is shooting nooses, apparently. But if you think about it, what he is doing is fraud. He is stealing bounty money from these various townships. Like it's he's committing a crime. He is like it's not even like Robin Hood. It's really just straight up like theft indirectly.
Hmm.
I
Yeah. The two nicest things he does in the entire movie are let Tuco live at the end, even though he's stuck in the middle of nowhere and tied up still,
Mm-hmm.
and giving a dead soldier his cigarillo, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because he feels
Well,
bad.
and like it's interesting, like because the bridge is kind of a like there's a nuance there because on the one hand, like they're down in there in the river, they could have snuck through if they wanted, right? Like
Well, what they were saying is they couldn't have gotten through
the other
by
enemy
story. They
camp,
couldn't have got
right?
through the other side until the battle stops.
Right.
So
Yeah,
they needed the
like so,
battles.
but
Yeah.
that said, like we sort of imagine that if they really wanted, they they could have found a way. But certainly they kind of got dragooned by the army, um, and would have had a problem on the other side. But that there was that whole bit too where uh, the it's there's a little bit of like the futility of war thing where like both of these like neither side can actually successfully drive off the other, but because both sides want the bridge intact under their control, they're kind of just locked in a stalemate that's just chewing through soldiers like a meat grinder, with the impossibility of either side winning definitively because neither of them is willing to do what it will take to do that because it will risk the bridge. And so, through some uh, rather opaque but nonetheless obvious signaling from the Northern general, like he can't just come out and say it, but he kind of is kind of like, boy, this battle is just terrible, and it would just like have to just keep going unless, of course, the bridge were to somehow get destroyed. Then, boy, then we would just have to stop fighting and move
And even if I
along.
just thought about it, I could get court-martialed.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I'm telling you guys the secret. I've thought about it. I shouldn't be telling anybody. I definitely can't do it, but I
Yeah.
made plans for how it could be done.
Yeah, and so specifically Blondie and Tuco, by virtue of not actually officially being soldiers, he feels like he can sort of enlist them because then they are not traitors if they do it.
Right.
But it's ultimately a relief to this he's not even a general, he's just like a lieutenant or
No,
something, right?
they call him a general when they're pretending like they want to enlist, and it
Oh,
sort of is like the kind of thing that tips the hand of like these guys literally don't want to enlist. They're just here.
yeah.
They're saying this, so maybe I can.
It
He's a
is
cat.
it is a funny bit. It just reminds me where they're like, uh, they see some soldiers coming and they look like they're wearing gray uniforms. So Tuco starts immediately yelling out like pro-Confederate stuff to try to make sure that these soldiers will like them, only to discover that these soldiers are actually Union soldiers, and it's just that their blue uniforms are covered with road dust that made them look gray at a distance. It's like, whoops.
There's actually a significant amount of like subtle humor in this
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
I
Oh
I
yeah.
no.
It's very funny. Tuco is often very funny. Like he gets the whole bit. It's like, if you're gonna shoot someone, shoot. Don't talk.
Yeah, so there's a sequence that begins a little bit earlier. Like the funniest part of the movie is kind of in that part, that vein where you're talking about. And so they're in the part where Blondie, so Tuco gives up the name of the graveyard because he
Mm-hmm.
gets tortured. Lee Van Cleef doesn't even decide to torture Blondie because he's like, I feel like you're not going to tell me no matter what
Yeah.
I do to you. He's like, I'm just going to jump at the end, right? Like I'm sort
Mm-hmm.
of a kind of get to the end guy, and
Yeah.
you're not going to do it. So why am I going to waste my time? And he's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, you're right. So he's traveling with him, and then it starts with like the hey, you might want to tell all the other guys that are coming around with us that maybe they can just join us because they might catch a stray bullet if they're hanging out in the trees, and like then these other five guys come out.
Mm-hmm.
And so then he can have his gun because now all these guys are here. And so he's checking and he's like, oh, 6 bullets, the perfect number. And Lee Van Cleef goes, I thought 3 was the perfect number. And he goes, well, he's like, there are 6 people left to kill, or
Mm-hmm.
something like that, right? Like it's a funny line.
Yeah.
And then then they go on, they find Tuco when he's in the bath, and then well, before he gets this is the part you're talking about. When he's in the bath, the guy comes in and he's like, I've been practicing shooting so I could kill you, and he just shoots him from the bath, which
Through,
is
like,
hilarious.
he's got the gun in the bubbles of his bubble
Yeah,
bath.
in the bubbles,
Yeah.
shoots him and goes, yeah, maybe next time just shoot, don't talk.
Yeah.
Which I also think, as funny as that is so definitive to like how important like going back to the relationship between Tuco and the man with no name is because
Mm-hmm.
they often had chances to shoot each other
Mm-hmm.
and didn't. And he's talking about how he's not a guy who hesitates to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
So it just drives home that point that he didn't want to shoot him,
Mm-hmm.
But either way,
Well,
really
and
funny.
and it, all of this kind of just builds up to that incredible three-way
But there's
standoff
still one
at the.
last
Oh,
joke that I
okay.
wanted to tell
Oh,
before we
go
got
ahead.
to like of that sequence,
Sure.
right? So then the man with no name finds Tuco in the bath, and there's sort of the light humor of like Tuco's getting ready to figure out who it is, and he's like, "Hey, why don't you put on some drawers and drop your gun?" That's an okay joke, right? And then Tuco's like, "Oh, you're here, like I'm here. You're here with Angel Eyes, like I'm gonna go kill him." And he goes, and then Blondie goes, "Well, there's a catch. He's got 5 guys with him." You
Mm-hmm.
know? And there's sort of this weird pause. Like it's just I don't know that like deadpan humor of
Mm-hmm.
like I appreciate your gung ho-ness, but there's a lot of other dudes out there.
Yeah.
And then Tuco's like, well, screw it, I'll kill them all, right? And
Yeah.
then he runs out there, and then the payback of the relationship
Mm-hmm.
is that Blondie's coming along with him. He's like, you think I'm
Yeah.
gonna let you die alone?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So just that whole piece, it's funny and lighthearted. Like there's just this little capsule of like 30 minutes of the movie where like you're laughing almost the whole time, right?
Well, like this dynamic just really reminds me of a movie. It's a movie that I really only just watched for the first time, even though it's certainly been around for a while. Is Midnight Run,
Mm-hmm.
which is Robert De Niro and Charles Grodin, where De Niro is a bounty hunter who has to capture Grodin and bring him back for trial, but it becomes the road trip buddy comedy thing. But just the dynamic of ostensibly and technically they are rivals, even enemies, but they kind of become best friends. And I wouldn't say that Tuco and Blondie quite get there, but
On
at the
either
same
extreme, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
but at the same time, it does feel like there is this sort of mutual affection that can never be spoken.
Yep.
Um, and the stuff they do to each other feels almost more akin to pranks than real lethal intent.
Yes.
But in any case, all of this kind of leads up to that amazing three-way standoff because, like, where I was just thinking about it, watching it, and just thinking about how the dynamics of the standoff are so upset by the idea of there being three and having them be at like 3 points around a circle because you can't look at both of them at once, both of your opponents. And so it becomes this like almost like a prisoner's dilemma
Mm-hmm.
situation. Um, and like, and and again, it's tense, but of course it turns out in like not just the way we want it to turn out, which is of course for Angel Eyes to die, but what's fun is even though the whole setup is that anyone could try to shoot anyone at any time, and in theory, one person is trying to shoot both of the others, right? Like that's the setup, that's the premise of what they're doing. But,
Right.
oh,
Go ahead. No, I was
but,
gonna say, but that's part of the piece is that
mm-hmm,
like if you think about the way it works, that's part of why the standoff takes so long.
yeah,
Is because what you're waiting for is the other two to engage, and then you're gonna kill the
right.
one who survives
Exactly.
because
You want
you have the
someone
drop.
to try to shoot the other guy, and then you shoot him, and the person you shoot has already shot the third.
Right.
Yeah,
So it's very difficult to pick who shoots first.
exactly.
You
But
want to be the
you
last
kind of
shooter.
have to be trying to watch both, and so there's that whole dynamic. But what's so fun and satisfying, of course, is that Tuco and Blondie both move at the same time and both move to shoot Angel Eyes. And then ultimately, Tuco realizes that his gun was empty anyway
Yeah.
because Blondie had taken his bullets previously.
Right. So
Um,
Blondie just needed to make sure that he played the game long enough and beat Angel Eyes
right.
in the to the draw and to the shot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's an element of like, well, and maybe he'll actually try to shoot Tuco first. Although seems unlikely. Angel Eyes is definitely astute enough that he would not try to shoot Tuco before Blondie.
Correct.
But in any case, it's such a tense moment that pays off so wonderfully.
So wonderfully, yeah. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a couple other things I wanted to say about that. Like it is, I mean, it's iconic. It's such a great scene. The two pieces to it is like it also showcases number one of the things that is kind of as this being the definitive spaghetti western, outside of the fact of the glorious like Spanish, settings that you know take the place of New Mexico, which is
What do
fine.
you say? I mean,
Yeah, so
Italy,
it's
right?
spaghetti western because it's made by Italians, but it
Oh,
was
okay,
shot.
but oh, gotcha. I follow. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Also,
I
so
actually wasn't sure about that. So
yeah, it
yeah,
was
that's
shot in Andalusia, I think.
hmm.
So yeah, it's but it's made by Italians. Like the score is an Italian score. We'll get to
Hmm.
that to close out, I'm
Oh
sure.
yeah, well I was definitely going to mention that if we didn't.
Yeah, I feel like we just
Didn't.
like let's save that to the end. Let's close out on that.
Hmm.
Go out on a high
I mean,
note.
that was the note that I sent you when I was watching it. It was like the score, man, the score.
I
But
agree.
anyway,
We'll
yes,
hold on it to
yeah.
the end. It's
Hmm.
so good. Anyway, outside of that, one of the things that Sergio Leone in particular did with the spaghetti westerns was a style that's very definitive in this movie of the combination intense moments of the long shot and the close up,
Hmm.
but not the medium shot. Like the medium
Yeah.
shot tells the rest of the story.
Hmm.
And this scene is unbelievable in like that long shot when they're kind of like taking their positions
Hmm.
around the graveyard to
Because they're
get them
so far apart, but we need to see all three at once.
right. And they're all kind of trying to make sure they're equidistant so that it's
Hmm.
not like somebody's closer and has an advantage. You know, they're all kind of really pacing themselves, but like setting themselves up there, knowing where the stone is, knowing where each other are.
Hmm.
That long shot is phenomenal. And then the rest of the scene is literally just gun, gun, and just the tension that builds from those extreme close-ups
Yeah.
is unbelievable, right? Um, the other piece is that this movie has been, I mean, Quentin Tarantino has talked about how this is one of the most influential movies he's ever seen. And
Oh
obviously you can
yeah.
see a ton of the concepts in like Kill Bill, um, Hateful Eight, you know, all
Hmm.
those kinds of things.
I mean, it's there in Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction.
That's what I was gonna say. Like the Reservoir Dogs one is is oft forgot. I sometimes see in like my when people are like drawing Quentin Tarantino movies to this is the three-way standoff piece. Because it's done differently because it's like fast in
Hmm.
Reservoir Dogs. Like it's like boom, boom, boom. Like everybody's got their gun on each other, and it's like whoa, 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 what's gonna
Hmm.
happen? And then it's all dialogue, right? Look, this is no dialogue,
Yeah.
but he put his own spin on this scene, and it's
Yeah.
clear, you know.
But yeah, not shocking in the least to hear Quentin Tarantino really likes this movie because you could see that we were talking about like the being able to draw the lines of influence from Metropolis to other movies, but yeah, like this one is the same.
Oh yeah, so so good. Let me think.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. There was another thing in my notes that I wanted to talk about before we got to the score.
Yeah.
No, we did the standoff, we did the
Hmm.
humor, we did the
Yeah.
character types. I don't know.
Yeah.
I
I mean, it's just like it's just good. It's what it is, and it's entertaining. But again, like I was surprised putting it on. It's like what 3 hours?
yes, that was gonna be my last point. That exactly what you just said. Yeah, is that but you now that you've watched the 3 hour version,
Yeah.
you can see how incorrectly they
Mm.
could have pulled it. Like think about some of these scenes.
Yeah.
Like think about Tuco running through the graveyard. You know, like it makes sense that it takes that long, but it takes a long time.
Hmm.
If you're putting on a TV, like you can take 2, 3 minutes right there.
Yeah.
And they're laying the dynamite on the bridge. Like it's so methodical and like
Hmm.
letting you sort of think about what they're doing. And it lets us ponder what you're talking about of like, but do they really need to do this? Or could they get across? They're in the river. Could they get across?
Hmm.
But are they doing it because they're good and they actually want the war to stop because they also don't agree with it? Like these thoughts go through your head because it's dead silent. All they're doing is lacing dynamite for like 8 minutes, right? And so on TV,
Yeah.
it was long. I
Yeah.
remember
I don't know. Yeah, I didn't time it. But yeah. But the
there was
point is,
one of the
yeah, there are a
scenes.
lot of
I don't know if it
sequences
was
that.
that scene, but there was one where I went back and I was like, there was a really long scene. I don't
Hmm.
know if it was that one. I've connected them in my brain where it was
Certainly,
like
yeah.
7 or 8 minutes of like nothing really happening
The
except
pacing
like
is
the
not
event.
rushed, that's for
Yeah,
sure. And there are a whole lot of just sort of very episodic segments that you could imagine just getting lifted out entirely, and you wouldn't even necessarily miss it unless you knew it was supposed to be there.
right.
So,
And my yes, there's definitely that. I think my point was to this was that I enjoyed the parts where it kind of sat with the stuff.
hmm, yeah, no, I agree.
Like it sat with
Yeah,
them
it
laying the
doesn't feel
dynamite.
it's not a rushed pacing, and it is long, but it doesn't feel too long.
No, no. So that was my last point before the
Yeah.
score.
All
So
right.
yes,
Well, so let's talk about the score. So Ennio Morricone um, has done the score for an awful lot of movies. Um, but this might be his most iconic, you think? I can't think of another one immediately that's more, but just everyone just the da 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 da. I mean, everyone knows that. It's like a cliche. It's the sting you do to announce that you're doing a western parody of something, right?
yep,
It's like but like it's not even just that bit. Like obviously that bit is iconic, and it's a big part of like the main theme of the movie, but there's just so much incredible little incidental music that's just playing while they're like riding around on horses and stuff.
yes. I mean, obviously that thing's iconic. I read a little bit about that, and it's actually humorous. They've almost leaned into it. Is the opening note is meant to evoke a coyote howl.
Yeah. I could
And but it in the first
that's a
sequence,
good coyote owl.
yeah, the movie opens and closes with using the howl
hmm.
as part of it, right? Like, so there's the opening when the coyote does open its mouth to howl, and it goes into that, which I thought was awesome because it's like, oh, it's coyote howl, and the coyote's howling. And then the end, Tuco is about to call him like a no good son of a bitch.
Hmm.
And when he starts to say bitch, he goes, "You no good son of a,"
Yeah.
like, and so the movie's opening line by the coyote and closing
Hmm.
line by Tuco are like paired with that howl.
Hmm.
And then just the way it goes in between is so awesome. But yet, the other thought part I thought was really cool is like it reminded me of Peter and the Wolf, right? They all have their own instrument,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know. Yeah,
Like all the little motifs and the instrumentation of it, and just like so much just like iconic western soundtrack music is just like it's all here. Like every track is just perfect. It's an
yeah,
incredible score.
yeah. I mean, but just the fact that like when Blondie shows up, like there's a little motif that shows up with him, and then I actually just read somewhere that this one piece, and I don't know if this will come across, but apparently Metallica has opened their shows with this one.
Uh,
Can you hear it?
Not really. Uh, no, I'm not hearing any.
No.
No.
Okay. It's called Ecstasy of Gold. If you want to listen to it, or you can somehow lay it
Hmm.
on the audio. Apparently Metallica has like played that as they're like setting up. Like
Nice.
it's just sort of one of this like sort of you know ominous like sounds. It's so good. Yeah.
Very cool. But yeah, I was just pulling it up, and yeah, Ennio Morricone, with more than 400 scores for cinema and television, as well as more than 100 classic works. His filmography includes more than 70 award-winning films, um, uh, including other than like a lot of Sergio Leone's films, like this one. He received Oscar nominations for the Days of Heaven score, the Mission score, the Untouchables score, Bugsy, Milena, and the Hateful Eight, and winning for the latter. Um, he also got the an Academy Honorary Award, and he did also The Thing, John Carpenter's The Thing score. Um,
I
and
feel like some of those are just because people were appreciative of what he did here, and they like wanted like not that he wasn't talented already, but it was almost like they kind of wanted that clout.
mhm. I was a little actually surprised to see The Thing on there, just because for some, John Carpenter so often does his own scores, and I guess I didn't sort of remember that that one was an exception. But in any case, yeah. So the score is incredible, and it's kind of like it's notable enough that even as much else as there is to talk about in this movie, it feels like something that cannot go uncommented on.
Yes.
You know. All right, cool. Well, that was a pair of good movies for this episode, but let's talk about what we're doing next. Um, this idea was inspired when you were telling me about the Guardians of the Galaxy ride at you were at Disney World, right? Was that where you were?
Yeah, it's in Epcot at
Okay.
Disney World. It is one of the greatest rides I've ever been on. Um, I was trying to think, what did I compare it to you?
I, it
It's like I was trying to think. It took the best of two rides that are some of my favorites. So I,
okay.
anyway, I know one of them. I can't remember what the other one was, but so I love Space Mountain.
Mhm.
I think Space Mountain is one of the greatest rides ever created because it's a roller coaster in the dark,
Mhm.
right? Like you have no idea where you're going. And what they've done is essentially made a modern Space Mountain with all these cool like visual effects, but like you're still in the dark.
Mhm.
I mean, there's parts where like you're whipping around just like in Space Mountain, and then you'll fly up and then you'll start spinning down like onto the like towards like this glowing globe or whatever. Like I probably all makes sense, the Guardians of the Galaxy thing. I don't think it's sort of incidental to the thing, but like you're doing this weird, like I don't I can't even explain it. It's
Mhm.
the best ride I've ever been on.
Very
And so I
cool.
was telling you that,
Mhm.
and you're like,
Well,
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 it's also a really good movie.
yeah, see, the funny thing is that you've been on the ride, but you have not seen any of those movies.
Yeah.
Whereas I've not been on the ride, but I have seen all of those movies. I've seen like I've seen all of the MCU movies. You've seen just Black Panther, is that right? Or
I
you saw the
saw
first
one.
Iron Man, or one?
Yeah, I saw the first Iron Man.
Yeah, so there's an awful lot of the MCU that you have not seen, which is fine. But given your enthusiasm for the Guardians of the Galaxy ride and the fact that the Guardians of the Galaxy movies are my favorites amongst the MCU movies, we decided that what we're going to do is the Guardians of the Galaxy series. And what that means is we have Volume 1 and Volume 2, but then before Volume 3, it's a crucial part of the story what happens in Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame. So, Volume 1, Volume 2, the Infinity War and Endgame, and then finally Volume 3. And what's, I think, going to be interesting is Volume 1, 2, and 3, you don't really need to have seen any of the rest of it, but it'll be interesting to jump into Infinity War and Endgame without having seen the rest of the MCU. I don't think you will be confused about what's happening. I think you'll be able to follow the plot. But of course, it's like comic books. Anytime you have a big event comic and you've been following like one title, and now that title is crossing over with a dozen other things, it'll be interesting to watch it just from the perspective of having, like, you know who Captain America is, you know who the Hulk is, but you haven't seen them in those movies. And so it'll just be an interesting experiment, I think, to watch those movies in that context rather than the context of it being like the pinnacle of all of the other ones that had come before.
That makes sense. Okay. Yeah. No, I'm excited about trying it out.
Yeah.
I did remember the other ride that it reminds me of,
Oh yeah.
which is the Rock and Roller Coaster.
Ah
Have you ever
yes.
been?
Well,
So it's that's very
so,
Aerosmith focused, but the concepts behind that I think are really cool is number one, like you get to hear like you've got speakers in here playing music while you're on the roller coaster, but also it takes control of the roller coaster. Like it lets it fall at times, but sometimes it'll grab and it'll like launch it and like give you speed where you didn't expect it, like atypical of a normal roller coaster where you have to like chug up the hill.
mm-hmm.
So this movie uses all, or this ride uses all of that. And apparently, what I heard from somebody there is that I guess is Chris Pratt's character into music in the
Oh
movie.
yeah, it's a whole thing. You'll see.
It yeah, so that's okay. So that they play into that as you're getting on the ride, and he's like, something about like what is life without music, or what is
Mm-hmm.
America without rock and roll? I don't remember what it was. It's something like that. And it's like, so let's crank up the tunes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's actually 5 soundtracks apparently, which is part of why people like obsessively ride this ride, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is they like want to see which one they're
Oh,
gonna
okay.
get,
Interesting.
try to figure out like based on this, how do you find it? Like there's this whole like subculture in line where they're like, oh, if you get the best song, like it's gonna be better. And then yes, it has normal roller coasters. It's in the dark, so you can't see any of the pathways, but it will take control and it will stop you and launch you at like different times. It'll spin you up and down, like. And the song that we had was "Everybody Wants to Rule the World."
Oh, nice.
So we get off, and like Abby looks over at me and she goes, "All right, that ride was worth the hype." I was like, "Hell yeah, it was." And she's like, "And we got a good song." I was like, "Yeah, we did." Yeah.
That
And just
song,
that like
yeah.
moment, yeah, where we're just kind of like smiling and like nodding at each other. And then we get off, and our nieces and nephews get off, and they were like, "That was the coolest thing we've ever done."
Wow, very
Like,
cool.
yeah, so from a 10-year-old to a 46-year-old, like everybody loved it. So
Nice.
anyway,
And
we're gonna watch the movies. Yeah.
now you will learn the stories of whichever characters were also on the ride. It sounds like Chris Pratt's character is there. My guess is that several of the other Guardians show up at least in cameos.
So they mostly just launch the ride, and then
Mm-hmm.
the rest of it's just a kick-ass roller coaster,
Oh, fair
you know.
enough.
But there's like a whole piece, like, and obviously, like, there's the Disney thing of
Mm-hmm.
like walking, like making the wait for the ride very thematic, where it just
Mm-hmm.
like none of that clicked with me. I didn't really understand. And then like you get on the ride and like the raccoon thing talks, and then like somebody else talks, and then Chris Pratt talks, and I just remember him. They end on Chris Pratt with
Mm-hmm.
like, rock and roll forever, whatever he says, right? And then the music clicks in and the roller coaster shoots off, and you're just
Mm-hmm.
like, and then they don't really come into it after that. You just like are in the dark, just shooting
Yeah.
around. I mean, it's
I'm
but
just I and probably anyone else who has seen the movies is amused by like, oh, the raccoon thing. Yes.
what
No,
it is.
no, I get it. I know who you mean. Yes. So, in any case,
Anyway,
so the plan then is we are watching all three Guardians of the Galaxy movies with Avengers: Infinity War and Endgame in between Volume 2 and 3.
yep,
All right.
man,
Cool. So, in the meantime, everyone, watch good movies.
watch good movies.
Oops. I